on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Motherfucker, he's on his...
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Listener discretion is advised. The show contains graphic language and depictions of violence. It may not be suitable for all audiences.
We say fuck a lot. Hey guys, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Apologies, we are a little late getting episode 100 out.
It's kind of embarrassing being here at our 100th episode, but technical difficulties have affected us once again.
Yeah. It was like we've been plagued with several days of technical difficulties.
Well, it turns out Windows 10 sucks.
Yeah, we're not fans.
We're not fans.
That's why you should sign up on Patreon and donate to our podcast so we can buy a MacBook.
Yeah, we're saving right now.
Well, here we are, Dylan. Episode 100. This is a very exciting milestone for us.
It is. I can't believe we're still going.
When we began our Appalachian True Crime podcast, we had no idea it would grow into Mountain Murders, what it is today, and that we would have a 100 episode catalog. I mean, that's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, our downloads grow monthly. We have people reach out and tell us how much they like it, and how they listen every day on the way to work or while they're walking and jogging, or when they're drinking that bottle of wine and, knocking the kids, throwing them out of the room.
What?
What? Don't knock the kids. Just tell them to get the hell out.
Anyway, we really appreciate you guys because without our listeners, this wouldn't be possible.
No, and we had some great suggestions on our 100th episode, and we picked one, which was kind of a serial killer around the Appalachian area, through that all over the country, actually.
Well, I feel like you're just sort of dragging on.
Yeah, so we don't
Well, we let our patrons vote in a poll recently. We asked them what they wanted to hear for our 100th episode, and we had a tie between a heavy hitter, which we normally don't cover those heavy hitter serial killers, and also a tie between the heavy hitter and the Appalachian serial killer. So hopefully you won't be disappointed with our choice, because I think we kind of combined perhaps all of those things.
I think you did.
We found someone who is active in our region as well as a big name.
Yes, and we had some other great suggestions by patrons and other fans, and those have went on the list, and we will get to them. But we don't have time to mess around.
No, we've got a lot of information to tackle, Dylan. Are you ready?
Let's dive in with both feet.
Well, if you're a true crime aficionado, you've likely heard the name Samuel Little. Little is considered to be the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. Between 1970 and 2005, Little has confessed to 93 murders.
That's mind-boggling.
FBI crime analysts believe his confessions are credible. In the years since Little's final arrest, law enforcement has been able to verify 50 confessions, and more are still pending investigation.
Yeah, and I don't think Little will be the first killer who's in, he's an older man now. He's been in prison he'll be there the rest of his life. So he's definitely not the first one to maybe
embellish
or confess to other murders and to be proven wrong later. But there's a reason, as you'll find out, that the cops do believe him on all these cases and all these stories.
Well, it seems with some of these serial killers, Dylan, they're looking for that recognition.
Well, they're just trying to grow their brand.
Like perhaps the Zodiac.
Yes.
I mean, he was definitely into his own bullshit. He wanted to have a legend. He was hyping it up, sending letters to the police, giving himself a name. Same thing with like a BTK.
Oh, God.
Like they're so narcissistic that they want their story to be out there. But Samuel Little, he seems like the kind of guy that he didn't really give a shit whether people knew what he did or not. Like he wasn't looking for that fame and glory. So the fact that he's waited all these years and now he's finally confessing, I don't think it's so much for attention or recognition.
No,
I think he just sees it as, fuck it, I'm already here, why not?
I'm already here, and maybe I can improve my living conditions. I mean, that really seems to be his motivation at this point. And I'll just tell you, this is prolific. How many people he killed so many different areas in the country. It's such a crazy story.
Well, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
I'm ready. Okay, some might say that Samuel Little was doomed from the start. Many of us grow up in difficult circumstances, and though Little's childhood trauma is not an excuse, perhaps it can help us understand his journey. Little's childhood had criminal plastered all over it. Little was born at the onset of World War II on June the 7th, 1940, in rural Reynolds, Georgia. Now, the town is roughly 2 square miles and has a population today of around 960.
That's not very big at all.
No. And in the 1940s, they had around 871 people. So this town has not grown much in the last,
80 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
The town itself was named after a railroad official named Elsie Reynolds, and it had a large black community. So nearly 50% of the households in Reynolds were black, but there was widespread discrimination and racism at the time of Little's birth. I mean, it was just rampant. This was the Jim Crow South, and the KKK's history can be divided into 3 distinct periods from about 1867 to 1871 during Reconstruction, and then it resurrected again in 1915 and lasted through about 1944. So at the time he is born, there is, like I said, rampant discrimination, racism, and the KKK is very active, and especially in this area of Georgia.
Yeah, so we still have issues to this day in our society with racism and racial issues, but it sounds like Sam grew up when it was still very violent, and I could only imagine growing up in a climate like that.
Georgia Governor Clifford Walker, who was in office from 1923 to 1927, assured that his fellow Klansmen had positions in his administration. So it really just kind of set the stage for, I guess, how government operated in the state during this time. And at its height, which was during the second phase from 1915 to 1944, the Klan boasted around 5 million members.
Yes, and I think at this time, like you said, all the way up through through the White House and federal government, there were Klan members had prominent positions in government, and that's very scary.
And after World War II, those numbers did start to dwindle. Now, according to Little's own words, his teenage mother was a lady of the night. Some of us might call that a sex worker or a prostitute. And some speculated that Little was born in jail as his mother was incarcerated at the time of his birth.
So he just didn't have a chance from day one, it sounds like.
Abandoned as an infant on the side of a dirt road, Little was sent to Lorain, Ohio to live with his paternal grandmother.
How sad is that?
Now, I'm no professional psychiatrist or medical doctor, but I've done enough research into the subject that I think we can say it's easy to see that parental rejection, especially by mothers, is a really common thread among many serial killers. Yes,
it seems to give them some deep-seated hate, and they don't even know where it comes from or who, their hate towards their mother, but in the future, it's, just like hate towards women in general. And that's why they victimize women and murder women.
Well, the abandonment can create a deep-seated fear of rejection, and often they grow up to eliminate those who they see as a threat. Like this is a potential woman who could reject me.
Yeah, I think that's a very common thread in some of the worst serial killers we've had.
As our story progresses, we're going to see that perhaps Little was enacting a sort of revenge or rooted hate against his victims, which could come into play as far as, his childhood. Now, Little's father was reportedly a 19-year-old named Paul McDowell. And Little will use the last name McDowell on and off for periods of time.
Like an alias?
Yeah.
Okay.
Poor, black, and unwanted, Little struggled to fit in. Now, this was a time when many black families were fleeing to the northern areas, again, because they were trying to escape the Jim Crow South, and they were settling in the industrial areas of the Northeast and Midwest. Ohio had its share of impoverished black folks. Many thought moving out of the South would offer an escape from the racism, but discovered much of the same attitudes in the North. And when black people poured into the industrial areas like Lorain, middle-class white families left in droves, moving out to the suburbs, often taking with them small businesses and jobs. And these once thriving tax bases crumbled, resulting in these poor urban areas without the money to provide infrastructure, schools, housing, jobs. And Lorain was a rough and tough industrial area, kind of known for shipbuilding. It lies just on the tip of Lake Erie, kind of in that corner of Ohio and Pennsylvania where you have the steel industry.
Okay.
Right.
So you'd think there's lots of good jobs and this was, a thriving area, but it becomes a vicious cycle when you have a large segment of the population leave for whatever reason. And I think this might have been deemed the white flight later on, later years. But they take with them the good jobs, the tax base, and then the city or town really has nothing to work with as far as, infrastructure, basic services. And so you end up with these areas that for generations to come or decades to come are impoverished, and it's a very hard place to live.
Though there's not a lot of information available about Little's life with his grandmother, he seemingly had a difficult time. Samuel Little struggled throughout his youth with behavioral problems, discipline issues, and low academic achievement. He eventually quit Hawthorne Junior High School when he was 14 years old. And though not considered a good student, Little is known to be quite intelligent.
Yeah, to this day, if you listen to his interviews and listen to him speak, he's not a man with a low IQ or low intelligence. He's very smart. It sounds like he had trouble early on, even fitting in, kind of doing, fitting in the system, doing what you're supposed to do. This antisocial behaviors, I think, that will go on to explain why he lives his life the way he does.
And I think we see a lot of these serial killers of that particular generation, that boomer generation. They grew up at a time where schools didn't have the specialized education for certain students. So perhaps if he did have a learning disability or he was having like behavioral or emotional problems, they probably didn't have a social worker there to help him. They didn't have the guidance counselor. They didn't have the intervention services that could steer him on the right path.
And I think you could argue that it's not easy being a serial killer. You have to be cunning and plot it out and think about it. So I doubt any of them are, dumb.
Well,
what
Gary
you would call
Ridgway is
dumb.
pretty dumb.
Well, that's true. But his was kind of short. What was that, Green River Killer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected. Gary is dumb.
I'm just saying. So I think a combination of these things.
I think
we can
typically
see where he, maybe didn't have the academic performance that he was capable of. He didn't reach his full potential as a student.
Right.
He had a lot of things working against him
and
at
he
this
fell
time.
through the cracks and he stayed there.
Growing up, Little admitted he had a fascination with true crime and detective magazines. So see, we all have something in common with Sam Little.
And this part of his story I find fascinating.
He would read the magazines religiously. It was as a youth that he became obsessed with a particular true crime story, and that is the Gloria Ferry story, which was featured in True Detective magazine. A man named Statler murdered Ferry, his 18-year-old housekeeper, by strangulation. Little would later confess that reading this story really turned him on.
Yeah, so he kept that copy, and even watching him talk about it in the modern day, he still, you can tell, was really...
He would read and reread the story until he basically had it memorized, and this was just his go-to. Like, it just filled him with this intense excitement.
That's very, very kind of creepy.
He also recounted a schoolmate when he was only 5 years old that had red ringlets, and he was fascinated with her neck. And she would touch her neck, and it would drive him crazy.
Wow, those feelings at such a young age.
So he develops a fetish for women's necks that would continue, well, for decades.
And it was not a healthy fetish.
He said he first started having urges to strangle and kill women when he was 7 to 8 years old.
Well, that would be one hell of a kid to babysit right there. You're just looking at them, they're staring at you darkly, like flexing their little big hands. Oh, my God.
Also, his interest in true crime magazines taught him how to commit perfect crimes. Little became very aware of how fingerprints, hair, blood, and other forensic evidence of that time could lead to arrest. He had made a mental note of these facts at a young age.
Yeah, so long before many of these technologies were developed or even in widespread use, he already had it in his mind about not leaving things like fingerprints or how you left the body and things like that. That's very creepy.
In 1954, he was caught stealing a bicycle and tried in juvenile courts. He was sentenced to a youth correctional program for 2 years, I believe. I found conflicting information, but it seems to be for about 2 years. And it was called the Boys Industrial School near Lancaster, Ohio. It was a reform farm, and based on interviews without being specific, Little described his time at the school as brutal. He lived in a cottage with other boys and pretty much had the ability to come and go on the farm. It wasn't like a prison where they lived in a tiny cell. I mean, they lived in these little cottages. They did have freedom to kind of come and go. He was able to interact with other boys. So it wasn't a super strict environment. But the boys received training while they were there in trades like blacksmithing, tailoring, carpentry. And by the time he left school, he had 47 disciplinary infractions.
So it sounds like he had trouble following the rules. You know, what's scary about the environment that you're describing, as much as being locked in a cell would suck, everyone else has access to you as well. So if there is someone who wants to brutalize you, rape you, or beat you up, they have access to you at all times. So that's very scary. And we've heard this time and again about, especially back in the day, the reform schools were just brutal places who drew sadistic kind of personalities to be the guards and, administrators. So I'm sure that didn't turn him into a better person.
Well, as you mentioned, Dylan, I mean, we've heard stories of offenders who are sent off at a young age, and essentially they perfect their criminal skills. I think of Charles Manson, Carl Panzeram.
Yeah, and it calluses their heart over as well and their feelings towards other people. They look out for number one, and they don't care what they do. They don't care how it affects other people.
So all this time in juvie did little for him, except it didn't do anything to rehab him, but basically just introduced him to others who shared advice and information, how to get away with stuff and how to not get caught, and to perfect those criminal skills. And it was like a crime academy. And we've heard that, like I said, with Charles Manson, Carl Panzeram. So it does little to help these people. Abuse was rampant at these state-run schools, especially during this time. As you mentioned, Dylan, of course, it's probably not much better today. There is systematic maltreatment in the juvenile corrections facilities nationwide, and the percentage of juveniles reporting sexual abuse and victimization is still quite large at these facilities. So I imagine Little was likely subjected to much of the same exploitation and treatment. And though he doesn't go into great detail, again, he described his experience as brutal.
Well, in this environment, you're either the predator or you're the prey. I mean, that's the only two choices. There is no in between.
Now, upon his release from juvie, which was in 1956, Little began drifting from place to place. He is arrested in November of 1956, just a short time after he's released from juvenile detention, for burglary, and he's sent to another youth authority. This time it's in Omaha, Nebraska. In 1961, Little was arrested for a burglary and break-in at a Lorain, Ohio furniture store. He is given 3 years in prison for this crime, and he's released in 1964. When he's released, Little rekindles a relationship with his birth mother, who was living in South Florida at the time. Now, this was the first time in his life that Little lived in the same home with his mother.
Well, and it's interesting. I wonder how they found each other back then before social media and all that. That's very interesting.
Little has not revealed much information about what his adult relationship was like with her. He would live kind of on and off with his mother for periods of time, with Florida becoming kind of a home base. Same as Ohio. Despite the fact that he's living this nomadic lifestyle, he always manages to return back to Florida or to Ohio. I guess grounds he's familiar with and where he has family.
Yeah, where he might have somebody let him, sleep on the couch for a couple of weeks or something, get back on his feet. But all this stuff he's getting in trouble for is painting this picture of a lifestyle like he's not going to work a 9 to 5. He's not going to do the rat race thing. He's going to, through scams and stealing and whatever, just get enough pocket money to keep moving. It sounds like he never wants to stay in one place for a very long time.
In Florida, he held a number of jobs. He became a garbage collector for a piece and later was a groundskeeper at a cemetery. But he just could never seem to keep a job for more than a week or two, maybe even a month or so.
Yeah, it sounds like he got a paycheck or two, and then either his things he was doing made him, an unfit employee, or he just didn't want to keep working the same job.
In 1966, he is arrested again in Cleveland, Ohio for assault and battery after beating a woman. And I couldn't find any information on whether he served any time for this crime, but it was noted that that was, another arrest in his record. Now, it was not until the late 1960s that he really embraced the transient lifestyle. And it had him covering huge swaths of the country in just a matter of days. So over the next decade, he would be arrested in 11 states, including Ohio, Georgia, Maryland, Florida, Arizona, California, Massachusetts, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and New Jersey.
My God.
Living primarily out of his vehicle, he would leave Florida and be in California in 3 days' time. So it was this constant nomadic lifestyle that created roadblocks for law enforcement. He used an array of aliases, including Samuel McDowell, his paternal father's surname, and also William Lewis, and he had several other aliases he would use. And with no fixed address, tracking him down for crimes was nearly impossible.
Well, yeah, the entire nationwide system wasn't really connected all that much, save for, a detective in this jurisdiction may call someone if they have a question. But I could understand how it would be hard for them to track this guy or track all these crimes all over the nation because there just wasn't a system for that then.
Yeah, they weren't connected.
Yeah.
They were rarely communicating with each other. If he's using fake names, fake aliases, it would be hard to keep track of that. If you don't have income tax returns, an address,
yeah,
it would be hard to track you down.
How do you find it? I mean, it reminds me of the, bank robbers and the gangsters of the 20s through the 40s, and all they had to do was literally get a county over, outrun the law in that county, and then once the two-way radio obviously came into play, it slowed that down, but it's pretty... You couldn't even hold it against the investigators of the day for not making these connections. They just didn't have the tools.
During this time, Little was committing an assortment of crimes, from robbery, shoplifting, breaking and entering, solicitation, assault, drinking and driving, drugs, even rape. Little primarily stole money to make a living. He had a serious cocaine addiction, and he would shoplift, steal in a city or town, basically just to gather up enough money to buy drugs and alcohol, but he would never really stay in one place for too long. Often his run-ins with police were simply law enforcement trying to get him to leave town.
Kind of just shoo him along.
Like, you need to go on somewhere else. We don't want to deal with you.
It's like last call at the bar. We don't care where you go, but you can't stay here.
Exactly, yeah. On January 31st, 1970, it is believed that Little picks up his first murder victim at a bar in North Miami Beach, Florida. Her name was Mary Brosley, and she was 33. He described her in an interview as being a blonde with big tits.
Oh, well, those are some standout characteristics.
A confident Little approached the woman and offered to buy her a drink. Brosley shared with Little that she had left Massachusetts 6 months earlier. She suffered a drinking problem. She had hitchhiked to Florida, leaving behind a 7-year-old son, and that her family had no idea where she was, and her family had reported her missing.
This is information you should not give to anyone, but especially someone like Sam Little.
Brosley had a distinct limp after a hip surgery, and Little would recall later that detail when he talks about this crime.
And these are decades later, right?
She had a metal plate and screws from the hip surgery, and they would be used to identify her body. Mary's family later stated that she would get into a car or go with just about anybody who promised to provide her with alcohol. He drove her to a secluded area in what he called the Everglades, but we'll find out it wasn't really the Everglades. It was just a wooded area.
It's just a secluded wooded area kind of outside of the town.
Brosley sat on Little's lap while playing with a chain he wore around his neck, and it was there that he strangled her to death. He then buried her in a shallow grave. Brosley was estranged from her family. She had moved to Florida from Boston, was an alcoholic. So this was a woman who was on the fringes of society, and it didn't seem like anybody was going to be searching for her. So years later, Little would remember Brosley as wearing a floral sundress and that she had a necklace on at the time of her murder. A 15-year-old hunter and his father discovered her body in a shallow grave in a wooded area outside of Miami on January 24th of 1971. She was badly decomposed to the point of being unrecognizable, and her cause of death was undetermined at the time. Her brain did show alcohol readings of 0.29 to 0.37, which medical examiners said would have been enough to kill her.
Well, I'm amazed they could still get that, toxicology reading, if you will, out of her brain. So that's pretty amazing. So she was highly intoxicated at the time of her death. And she's living this very high-risk lifestyle. Her family described she'd get in a car with anybody, blah, blah, blah. And so here she's ended up in the hands of a monster, and she didn't even know it.
And just offers up all the information
and
he
tells
needs
him
to
that no one will look for me.
This is the perfect victim for me.
Yeah, she just offered it up on a silver platter. No one's looking for me. They don't know where I'm at if they are looking for me. I don't have any friends, blah, blah, blah.
I'm practically new in town.
I'm new in town. So it's very sad and unfortunate that this is the part. And a lot of times that's how these killers get their victims, is just through happenstance. Or, some might be stalkers who would pick a certain victim, like the BTK killer. But it's just so sad if you just look at it. It's just unlucky. It's just bad luck to the 10th degree.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yes.
And being too trusting.
Very much
naive. Whatever, yeah. Well, there's some speculation whether Brosley was his first victim, because Little also confessed to murdering an Air Force nurse. He believed her name was Karen O'Donoghue, sometime perhaps in 66 or 67. He also claimed he killed a woman named Sarah Ordana, who was from Cuba.
So these are before, what was the girl's name, his first victim?
Mary Brosley.
Before Mary Brosley, he's saying that he killed 2 other women. But he can only remember so many details, and it's unsubstantiated.
It is, and also we will come to find through his confessions that though he is really keen on certain details of the victims, he's not really great with time periods. So he jumbles time periods. He'll get years wrong. So they were kind of like, when he said this about these 2 victims possibly in the late 60s. They know they can prove Mary Brosley,
right?
But these others are not proven, and he may have those mixed up with like other people at other times.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps.
Well, it's just so many victims. My God.
Well, if you got 93, I guess it's hard to keep track.
It's all over the country.
He thought he buried her in a remote area like the Everglades, Mary Brosley. And Little would state that after attempting to bury her, he would never try to bury another person in Florida because the ground was too hard.
Well, that just comes down. You hear the shallow grave comes up, and so 90% of the stories of a missing victim, and then they're finally found. And that's just a lack of dedication on the killer's part, in my book. You don't have the proper tools. Now, if you have a damn good square point shovel, or let's say a round point shovel for the digging in the ground, and a pickaxe, and just a little bit of moxie, some good work gloves, because that's going to callus them hands up, some water, you can dig a proper grave. So I think there's undiscovered killers out there who are just proficient at digging the proper depth grave.
They're making the proper preparations ahead of time.
Yes.
Well, they say improper planning leads to piss poor production.
Well, I think that in this case, that is exactly right.
We have to work smarter, not harder here, people.
Okay, so we're looking for the grave digger. That's what I'm calling this killer we've never found.
Well, later in years, Little recognized a photo of Brosley, and he was able to recall the details like she had a limp, she wore a necklace, she had on this particular dress. Oh, yeah, she was blonde, had big tits.
She told me her backstory.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's crazy. Well, other victims around this time include an 18-year-old woman named Mary Ann, who was killed in 1971, and 2 other Miami victims, including a 28-year-old unidentified black woman and a 22-year-old black female, possibly named Linda. And he claimed he killed both of these women in 1971 in the Florida area. But again, they have yet to be, I guess, discovered or identified.
Okay.
But they're in that list. In May of 1971, Little is charged with armed robbery in Cleveland, and his girlfriend at the time is a woman named Lucy Madero. Charged with robbing a gas station, Madero is also awaiting trial in a cell with a woman named Aurelia Jean Dorsey. And while Samuel Little is also in the same jail awaiting trial, he's charged with sodomy, but he's never tried on the sodomy count.
Yes, you can see a progression in just his other crimes he's getting caught doing or getting convicted of. There's a progression from, shoplifting, petty theft, robbing a place when no one's there, and then moving on. I mean, the violence is increasing. So I think maybe he's working his way up to, I'll just do whatever I want. I'm not scared of the consequences.
Well, this is an interesting part of the story. It kind of takes a strange turn. So it was during this stint in jail that Little meets Jean, Aurelia Jean Dorsey, and she's 30 years older than him. His girlfriend, Lucy Madero, is cellmates with Jean and confides in the woman that she was going to testify against Little in this upcoming robbery case. Jean was able to locate Sam Little in jail, alerting him to Madero's plan. And due to the conditions of the jail, there were holes in the walls and ceilings, and it allowed for easy communication among the inmates.
So people could just pass word along, tell so-and-so this for me.
Yep.
That's very interesting that she's just like, I wonder if her motivation was, I don't like people who snitch on people, because she doesn't even know Little at this point. But she's like, she's going to make sure and get him word that his girlfriend's going to, basically dial him out in trial.
When the case finally went to trial in 1972, Madero did testify against her former boyfriend, Samuel Little. However, his defense team was able to plan for it using Jean's information. Little was eventually found not guilty on the armed robbery charge, and by this time, Jean, who had been in jail on a shoplifting charge, was outside waiting on Little.
Oh, so now they've made fast friends.
In Jean, Little would find a mother figure, a companion, criminal partner, and traveling buddy. And because Jean had shown him loyalty, Sam wanted to be with her.
Yeah, but society would have been better off if he went away for 10 or 15 years for the armed robbery charge, because he's preying on people left and right.
Little would later describe Dorsey as no beauty, but he greatly appreciated her skills, especially when it came to being a master shoplifter, which she taught him how to do these things. And the pair were able to fund their travel on monies that Jean made from shoplifting and then selling the stolen goods.
So now he's basically got a literal partner in crime.
Jean would go into like high-end department stores. She would steal clothes, shoes, purses. They would take them on the streets and they would sell them at a fraction of the price or return the stolen items and get money back. They had a whole scheme.
Yeah, it sounds like she was now he has a more, probably sounds like a more efficient way of funding his nomadic lifestyle.
In a 2018 interview, Little said she was primarily the one supporting them, and though Jean was never a victim, the pair were together until 1988 when she died of natural causes. She had a brain hemorrhage in Los Angeles, but she was complicit in his activities. It has been reported that Jean would clean Little's vehicles. There would often be blood, feces, other bodily fluids left behind.
Jesus Christ.
She would throw away personal items that might be left behind.
So
An earring, perhaps a pair of women's underwear, a stocking.
He would come back after a night of killing someone, playing as he calls it, and she would get rid of all the evidence and clean the blood and feces and body fluids out of the car. That just is one of the, I just don't know what kind of person you are to be able to just be like, oh, well, he's back. Let me go get the personal out and the evidence out of the car. That's just, my God.
While on the road, Sam and Jean would stay in motel rooms, or on occasion they would rent a cheap apartment, like those pay by the week types of apartments.
Those are always very nice apartments.
Yeah. Jean would turn in around 10 p.m. every night. He would tuck her in, take care of her, tuck her in, make sure she's, drifting off to sleep. And then that's when Sam would go out to play at the bars and the nightclubs. And he kind of talks a little bit about their relationship, that they kind of had this like memo of understanding regarding Little's sexual appetites, what their relationship was, and whatever his nocturnal activities were was just like not discussed.
So he'd literally go hunting for a victim. Wow.
Yeah. And so I guess Jean just knew that like I'm 30 years older than him. We're not having sex, but he's a young man. He's going to,
She didn't know exactly what he was doing, but she obviously knew he was doing something very violent and not good.
Likely. And the following days, after he would return in the early morning hours, he would find himself asleep. Jean would busy herself with cleaning the various automobiles that they owned over the next years together. So let's pause for a moment and hear from our sponsors, Dylan. Throughout the 1970s, Jean and Little traveled across the U.S., committing a number of crimes. In September of 1976, he's arrested for a rape outside of St. Louis, Missouri. His victim Pamela K. Smith told police he choked her from behind with an electrical cord, snatched her off the street, forcing her into his car. He beats her unconscious, then drove her to a remote location where he raped her. Her hands were bound behind her naked body. She somehow manages to kick the door open and escape, and then she flees to a house for help. Now, the DA didn't consider Smith a strong witness because she had a history of drug problems, a lengthy criminal record.
I'll never understand that. And that's why these killers prey on these types of people, because no one takes them seriously. No one will do anything to fight for them. They're literally written off as citizens, as people.
So the charges are reduced to attempt to ravish.
Oh my God, he almost ravished me.
Little claimed he didn't rape her, but admitted that he had beaten her up. He is sentenced to 3 months in the county jail for this crime. So
Yeah.
only 3 months.
Honestly, I'm surprised back then, especially he even got 3 months for beating her up.
Well, as we've seen, he's arrested over the course of his life something like 76 times.
Yeah.
Ends up serving very little prison time.
It's amazing.
Over the decades.
It's amazing when you see the system fail continually over years and decades. They had so many opportunities to get this predator off the street.
This is an important time. I should mention also that Little is a boxer. While he was incarcerated in prison, he learned to box. And he's a stocky dude. He's about 6'1", maybe 6'2". And at the height of his, crimes, when he was a younger man, he probably weighed about 225, 230. But he's a big-shouldered, you can tell he's like a stocky, husky dude.
Well, you take a guy who's
Muscular.
6'1", between 220 and 230, but it's all in his upper body. I mean, he's not fat. He's a big, thick guy.
Yeah, he's like barrel-chested guy, but he's not fat. He's just like, you can tell that's muscle.
He's a big, strong guy, and tell him his other trait that makes him perfect for this.
He has gigantic hands.
He has freakishly large hands.
The man's hands are fucking huge.
Every investigator, every professional who came in contact with him said when you walked in the room, the first thing you noticed was his damn lunchbox size hands. He has these mega hands like the pro athletes.
It's like Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah, just extra large, huge, big, strong hands. He has this big, strong upper body. It's like this guy was built to strangle people.
Well, and that was one of the reasons he got into boxing when he was in prison, is the other guys who are boxing were like, man, you've got the perfect build. You've got these giant hands. Like,
yeah,
let's
this big upper body.
Let's train you to box because you'd be great at this.
And so when he comes out, now he can beat the shit out of his victims before he rapes them. Nice.
And he will. He'll proceed to beat and punch his victims over the years. Authorities find the body of Julia Critchfield, a 36-year-old woman, on January 22nd, 1978. She's found at the bottom of a dirt pit in the north part of Saucier, which is in the Gulf Coast area. I believe it's outside of Gulfport, maybe, Mississippi. She had died from strangulation, and at the time of her murder, there was no physical evidence, and the case would go cold until 2018 when Samuel Little finally confessed to her murder.
Wow, all that time her family has no idea all they know, she was brutalized, murdered, and they have no closure. All that time wondering what happened to their family member.
In November of 1982, Sam Little is arrested for shoplifting in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Once in custody, law enforcement began piecing together that he matches the description of a suspect in a recent murder. Melinda Rose Lepre, we're going to talk a bit about her. She was born in New Hampshire in 1960 to a very, large family. Her mother passed away when she was a young child, and her father was an alcoholic who had a hair-trigger temper. She began acting out, using drugs, drinking at a fairly early prepubescent age, like 11, 12, 13. And her family described her as a musical prodigy. I mean, this girl could pick up any instrument. She could learn, play it almost immediately. She could play music by ear.
That's
listening
amazing.
to her family talk about her in interviews, they're like, she was so talented when it came to musical instruments.
There's no telling what she would have done if she had had some support and a loving family.
She's very intelligent. She had managed to graduate high school a year early, but immediately after graduation, she left home. And by 1982, Melinda found herself in Pascagoula, where she was a sex worker. And from what I gather, a bit of a drug addict.
Well, yeah, I think it was her siblings, some of her siblings, who said that even though she kind of stepped into the parental figure, the mom, if you will, And even dealing with all that from her father, who was very dysfunctional and horrible combination, alcoholic with a bad temper. She still had kept straight A's, graduated school early, but they got a sense that she started dabbling with drugs just to escape from reality, which is very common.
And then finds herself as a sex worker.
And I'm going to get the hell out of here as soon as I'm big enough.
Yeah.
And so, that's very, very sad for any of this to happen to anybody. But when you have someone with so much potential, she literally could have been on genius level and prodigy level on music and stuff like that. So that's it's horrible. It's just horrible to even see.
Well, there's so many victims, and I'm not able to touch on, all of these victims.
No, it'd be
but the ones that I was able to kind of dive in and find information, I felt it was important to share who these victims were because they're real people.
Well,
they have families, and they might be living a lifestyle that society condemns, but these are people. These are human beings. They have friends, family, children, people who care about them.
Well, and it's one of the reasons that these types of victims are written off because even us normal people, when you say someone's a drug addict or living on the streets or a prostitute, even if you don't consciously, if you're a cool and open-minded person, in the back of your lizard part of your brain, you're like, well, you shouldn't have been doing that or, you shouldn't be living that kind of lifestyle. But I think it's important that you're pointing out how these people end up pushed into that lifestyle.
Well, I think when we talk about serial killers, murderers, and we talk about these victims, it's kind of easy to be a little bit dismissive of like they're just another number.
Yeah.
But the humanity is there, and we need to be able to recognize that these people are victims.
Yes, and they likely ended up here for a reason.
Yeah.
Right.
And when Little is in Pascagoula, so here's the story. He approached a group of women on the street in Pascagoula, and he initially asked a woman named Catherine Cousins for a date. So I imagine he's kind of in this area of town. There's some cheap motels, groups of sex workers on the streets. He approaches these women. And Cousins immediately refuses him, saying she was just badly beaten recently, and she no longer accepted dates from strangers.
Okay.
She's only accepting dates from regulars, men she knows.
I don't blame her on that.
Well, this pisses Little off because he does not like rejection. So he tells her, I'll kill you, and I'll kill all these women if I want to. So he threatens her, and her first instinct, of course, is like, get the fuck away from this guy, right? So she kind of tries to, make some distance. But before she has a chance to go warn the other women on the street, Little already managed to get Lepre in his car.
Oh, my God.
Cousins, witnessing this, she runs to this nearby motel where Lepre had been staying with her boyfriend/pimp. Because her boyfriend's the one putting her out on the streets, basically. Now, the boyfriend runs out trying to chase down Little's car. But the two vanish into the night. And when she never comes back to the motel, he reports her missing. But at first, police don't want to take it seriously. They are like, well, she's a sex worker.
They're probably arguing.
She's probably just run off somewhere. These women, they disappear for days at a time. She might be on a drug bender. She'll come back.
Her pimp/boyfriend's reporting her missing. They're probably just arguing over money. Who cares? Basically, who cares?
They're just these people living in this motel.
Right.
I mean, they're not citizens we're concerned about, I guess.
Well,
that's the attitude.
In their defense, it's probably a motel they get called to all the time for people in drug, fugue states arguing, and they try like hell to get these girls to go away from these guys. Sometimes to get out of this lifestyle, and they just keep going back. So I mean, when you look at it from both sides, it can be tricky.
Melinda's body was found days later in a cemetery. She's actually stuffed down in a water-filled ditch. And this is October 4th of 1982. 2 weeks after disappearing, they find her, and she's been strangled.
So that's very scary. So she pisses Sam off, and Sam wasn't a bad-looking guy. I mean, his look fit the 70s and things like that.
Are we talking about Catherine Cousins?
Yeah.
She pisses him off.
Well, she pisses him off, and he says, basically, I'll kill somebody, or I'll kill you, damn you, or whatever. And then literally someone she knows is in his clutches, and she tries like hell to help her. And then she's found 2 weeks later stuffed in a ditch.
Lepre's body was badly decomposed, but authorities were able to tell from a dislodged hyoid bone that her cause of death was strangulation. Police scramble for leads. Catherine Cousins and a few of the other sex workers are interviewed. Cousin tells them about Samuel Little. Other sex workers knew of Little as well, and 2 other women come forward claiming that he had assaulted them upon earlier visits to Pascagoula when he had been passing through before.
Yeah.
One of the women even described an incident where she had taken Little back to her apartment and he attempted to drown her in her bathtub.
Well, I'd say that's something you don't forget.
A grand jury declines to indict him on Melinda's murder. He is extradited from Mississippi to Gainesville, Florida, to face charges for the rape and murder of another woman at the time.
It makes you wonder what that grand jury's thinking.
Well, I read some interviews with the sex workers who basically came out and said, we tried to tell authorities who this guy was, but they just don't give a shit about black women.
And that's true.
Which we see that in the media now.
That's been proven. That's the grim sleeper or whatever. He preyed on that exact person. And how many years did that go by? Nobody cared.
So here's where things get interesting. So he's awaiting trial in Mississippi. They're doing the grand jury and all that. And while he's sitting there, Gainesville, Florida happens to get this information about Sam Little. And they're like, this matches a murder suspect that we are looking for.
Yeah, the description of the guy, the vehicle, all that sounds exactly the same.
So let's get into this story. This is just so crazy. Charged with murder, that's dropped, then charged with a second murder. Just within a matter of weeks.
Well, I think something's going on here. This guy might be murdering people.
On September 12th of 1982, the body of a woman is found in a hayfield near Gainesville, Florida. Patricia Mount had a low IQ of around 40. She lived in and out of assisted living facilities and was kind of known to law enforcement. As a matter of fact, the day she is taken by Little, she had just been released from jail for a drunken disorderly.
So that's a very low IQ, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a person that can just barely function to take care of themselves. Is that right?
Yeah.
Susceptible to being talked into things, or very openly trusting of everyone, no matter what. So it's a very, very dangerous situation for her to be in.
She was an alcoholic. She hung out in bars, the same few bars in town. She was known, again, to cops, law enforcement, but also people at the bar because she was just a barfly.
Right.
And as you mentioned, Dylan, people said she was a very trusting individual. She had a history of talking to just about anybody in bars. If somebody bought her a drink, she would be their best friend. Just really naive.
That's sad.
Childlike. On the night she disappeared, witnesses in Willie Mae's bar saw Patricia hanging around with this man, and he will later match the description of Sam Little. The man was driving a station wagon with wood grain siding, the same car that Little had at the time. So while he's in custody on the LaPree murder, Florida authorities are able to locate him. They find that he matches the description of their murder suspect, and they show up in Mississippi to speak to him, and he admits, yeah, I was at the bar, but I didn't leave with that woman.
Yeah, so he has his car at this time he's driving is a very distinct looking car. Kind of had faded wood paneling, a station wagon, and it had various other characteristics that made it stand out. So I think they feel like they're on the right trail.
Well, what's interesting, Dylan, is that there were eyewitnesses who saw Patricia Mount get into the vehicle with him. Because when he first pulled up at this Willie Mae's bar, across the street from the bar, I guess there was like a hotel or something, and a laundry worker, a female, had taken a break from her shift and was sitting out there smoking. He pulls up. He's trying to talk her into having a drink with him.
So he's just trying to holler at anybody he can.
She refuses. I'm working. I'm on my break. But she's like sitting out there watching. He goes in the bar, comes back out later. She sees him with Patricia Mount. She knows Patricia, because Patricia's always at this bar and is known in this part of town, sees them get into the car together. So we have an eyewitness stating, this is the guy, here he is in a lineup, he took her, put her in this car.
Yeah, and not only it's not like she's just barely caught a glimpse of some unknown, she interacted with the guy at close range. So, I mean, that's a really good eyewitness, someone who's at work, not another person there at the bar who might be intoxicated and all that. A responsible citizen at work on break. So that's a really solid eyewitness.
However, so I have to get into this part of the story. So Gene and Sam had picked up another travel buddy at this time, a man named Danny. And Danny was from Arkansas, and I'm not really clear on how he managed to hook up with Sam and Gene, but Danny would later state that he and Gene were asleep at a motel in Ocala on the night Patricia Mount was murdered. Little didn't show up at the motel until almost daylight, and in the hours following, Gene proceeded to clean out the station wagon, including human feces from the back seat.
My God.
When Patricia Mount's body is discovered, she had defecated herself. So they were able to say, okay, that makes sense that it would be in the backseat of this car where she's murdered.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm going to guess Danny was probably living a similar nomadic lifestyle, just doing whatever, maybe petty crimes, some scams to get by, using drugs. And I'm sure that's how he probably hooked up. Somehow he's benefiting those two, maybe helping them with their scams. But how could you imagine being this third wheel with this very weird pair of friends who have been living this lifestyle for a very long time? And I don't think I would. I think that'd be the end of my involvement that day, don't you?
Well, as soon as Gene cleans out the station wagon, immediately the three pile into Sam's car and they make their way across the Gulf Coast. And that's where he encounters Melinda Lepre, just days after he's murdered Patricia Mount.
I'm not getting in the shit car. Okay, I'm not. I don't know what happened. I don't know why the back seat is covered with, maybe blood and shit. But yeah, I'm done, guys. I'm going to walk away from the hotel right then.
Well, being the third wheel, they're going to make you ride in the back seat.
Well, I'm not riding in the shit seat.
At Mount's 1983 murder trial, eyewitnesses were again able to place her with Sam Little, including leaving in his car. One of Little's hairs was also found on Patricia's body. Now, Danny was set to testify against Little, but he vanishes. So they lose a star witness in this man. And the trial is postponed twice while they're trying to locate their star witness. But finally, they have to proceed. And as the trial was concluding, it only took jurors 30 minutes to find him not guilty.
Oh, my God.
So 2 hours later, Little is back on the streets.
Yet again, I understand how court works, and, the burden of evidence is on the prosecution, beyond a reasonable doubt and all that. But it's like they weren't even entertaining the thought that he might be guilty. 30 minutes is one of the quickest deliberations I've ever heard of.
Well, I think it just goes to show that this jury sees Patricia Mount as just a lesser than, like, a throwaway person.
My God.
Like, they just don't care about her.
Women, period, in all different walks of life and all that, have just so much violence has been allowed to happen to them in our society. And it continues to this day.
Little would later tell investigators that he had killed at least 10 women in the South and Midwest during the early 1980s. Some of the murders have been linked to existing Jane Doe cases, and others have been identified as a result of his confessions. Mary Jo Payton and Frances Campbell were both killed in 1984 and eventually matched to Little. So Mary Jo Payton is one of those cases that, one of the murders that I guess is kind of more known, like widely known as far as Sam Little goes. She was a 21-year-old and she was seen leaving a bar with him. He drove her to an abandoned factory where he strangled her to death. Then he dragged her from the car and threw her body down a basement stairwell. It was on July 3rd of 1984 that two employees saw a substance sort of seeping out from this basement door area. And I guess there was a smell. And they end up finding her body.
Wow. I work in a place that has... It's a factory still operating, but we have parts that are literally abandoned, not in use, the oldest parts of the mill. And I could only imagine being at work, maybe just out piddle farting around, and to discover a body like that. That's really scary. That would be horrible.
By October of 1984, Samuel Little is in San Diego, California. A woman named Lori Barros comes forward to police with a story of being raped and assaulted by an African-American man in a large American automobile. Now, according to Barros, she was kidnapped off the street by this man, who then drove her to an undeveloped area of town. He raped her, repeatedly strangled her. Like, she would go unconscious, and then when she would, come to, he would do it all over again. So he's just terrorizing this woman.
Yeah, and he's killed many victims up to this point, so he knows how to strangle someone till they're dead. So he's playing with her.
She's not really aware of the time frame, but she feels like this is going on for some hours.
I'm sure.
Right? So she's just being tortured and tormented by him. until he finally just tosses her out into the darkness, probably thinking he killed her. Now, she described Samuel Little to a T, describes his vehicle. She recalls details that they had fuzzy dice, like hanging from the mirror. The car had a maroon interior. There was some damage to one of the windows.
Yeah, it was taped up.
While investigating Bayros' story, an officer decides to drive out to the remote location where the incident happened, just trying to get a feel for like the area, what kind of person might bring somebody out here, that kind of thing. And this is just a strange story.
This blows my mind.
So on this particular night, the officer pulls into this area, and he's like, I should mention, a bit of a rookie cop at this point. Like, he's pretty new to the force, young guy, you know. He pulls up into this area, and he spots a parked car. So he turns off his headlights, and he's kind of watching. It's a large American-made car matching the description that was given by this victim. The officer can see a man in the back seat moving around. The officer watches Little get out of the car. He's adjusting his pants, pulling them up, zipping them, you know. The officer then proceeds to get out of the vehicle. He tells Little, you need to come over here, walk toward me slowly, hands up.
Yeah, I'm sure he's on full alert, the officer.
Now, the officer can see that Little has fresh scratches on his neck. And inside the car, the officer walks around. He finds a nude female lying partially on the back seat with her head crammed down at the floorboard. Her face is bleeding. And Little tells the officer, oh, that's my wife, and we're just fooling around.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a really strange kink you're into, buddy.
Officers arrest Little, and they manage to revive the woman. Her name is Tanya Jackson. Now, at this point, the DA begins building a case against Little. With the two women's testimony, along with basically, you know, being caught red-handed, the DA feels like this is going to be a slam dunk case.
Why would you would have to feel like that as an investigator or the DA, the prosecutor? We're going to put this guy away. He's violent. He's attacking women, and we're getting him off the street.
However, Jackson shows up to court drunk, so there goes her credibility as a witness. Jean also takes the stand, and so we've got this little old lady who they said was like an excellent witness. Very believable, sweet, grandmotherly.
Oh, she's using everything she can. She's been manipulating people, it sounds probably all her life.
Turning on the charm.
Oh, my
and
God.
She states she and Little had only arrived in California 2 days before the Jackson assault, so there was no way that Little could have attacked Lori Bayros. Now, eventually the DA makes a deal with Little. They see that this witness's credibility is dwindling. Their case is kind of falling apart. So Little accepts the offer, which is 4 years in prison.
Oh, my God.
However, he only serves 30 months of his sentence before being released.
So basically 2.5 years of a 4 years sentence. And so then here's yet another chance. Gosh, I've lost count of how many times. Of course, these people never knew who they were really dealing with. He could have been put off or taken off the street, and countless victims would have been saved. I mean, it's just another blown opportunity by our system to catch the real monsters that it's built to catch.
You're absolutely right, Dylan. So after a few months, he's released in 1987. He murders 41-year-old Carol Alford in Los Angeles. He dumped her body in a South Central alley. Alford is one of 7 women Little claims he murdered in the city that year, though the others have yet to be identified, or their identities are unknown at this point.
So many victims. I mean, you can't even keep track of it all when you try to, line it up in a row. It's crazy.
Jean, his companion, she dies in 1988 while they're in Los Angeles. In 1989, Little murders 2 women in the late summer. Audrey Nelson is killed in August of 89, and a few weeks later in September, he murders a woman named Guadalupe Apodaca. Now, the 3 murders in Los Angeles will remain unsolved for decades, but these women will also help crack the case wide open years later. So remember those names: Audrey Nelson, Guadalupe Apodaca, Carol Alford. Now, throughout the 90s, Little will claim to have murdered more women in Los Angeles, the South, and Ohio. He's arrested for more petty crimes during this decade, including a 1991 shoplifting arrest in Lorain, Ohio. And while he was shoplifting, he hit someone trying to flee the scene of the crime, like with his car. So he's also charged with aggravated robbery. In 1998, he pleads guilty to attempted robbery for that 1991 charge.
What the hell?
It took 7 years to get him in front of a judge.
That makes absolutely no sense to me.
He is sentenced to 2 years in prison for this. Finally, right? By August of 2005, Samuel Little will be finished with murder, or so he says.
My God, he should stop. I mean, seriously.
35 years at this point.
Yeah, and his cooling off period doesn't seem to be very long, like 3 to 6 weeks. My God.
His final victim was a woman named Nancy. Little claims Nancy was his brief travel companion. He picked her up somewhere around Decatur, Alabama. He took her to, and it was funny, in the interview he's trying to describe where he took her. He couldn't remember the name of the town, but he said, Elvis has a house there. It's in Mississippi.
Oh, yeah, and you knew where that was at. I
said,
didn't
that's
know.
Tupelo.
Tupelo,
So
Mississippi.
he took her to Elvis's birthplace, Tupelo, Mississippi. That's where he strangled her, then dumped the body. She would later on be identified as Nancy Stevens. And Nancy came from a good family. She was a straight-A student. She was a mother. She had worked briefly for General Motors, but she had become hooked on crack.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Now, her son, he was featured in an interview in 2015 about his mother's unsolved case. This is where things are interesting. An FBI analyst that was working on Little's case, trying to match him to other crimes, was able to find this newspaper article and this interview with this woman's son. We've got this name, Nancy Stevens, and match that with Little's confession about murdering a woman named Nancy and leaving her body where Elvis had a house in Mississippi.
Yeah, see, I mean, he's committed these crimes over all these decades, long before many of these techniques and, modern information age and all that. Everything's connected more now than some people want it to be. But I think this is one of the best examples of modern technology solving crimes from the past. Because
and we'll get into
yeah.
The FBI and their work and how they've really been able to crack this case.
Well, yeah, profilers, all that mentality.
It's really amazing.
It's all really matured at this point.
They're able to bring resolution, finally, after all these years, to Nancy Stevens' family. By 2007, an aging Little is arrested for possession of cocaine, and he pleads guilty in California. Now, instead of prison time, Little is sentenced to attend a court-ordered rehab program.
What? With a criminal record like that, I don't understand. I'm all for giving addicts every chance, every opportunity, because I think busting people using is never going to stop the problem of drugs in this country. But, oh my God, this guy keeps on. He must be the luckiest person in to the justice system ever.
He's the luckiest some bitch on the planet.
My God. So after all that and a lengthy criminal history, he still gets, he's not even going to do time for the cocaine.
Nope. And Samuel Little, the thing you have to understand about him, he's had so many interactions with law enforcement. He is incredibly charming, charismatic. He knows exactly how to talk to law enforcement, how to manipulate them. He knows exactly what judges want to hear.
Yep.
He knows how to handle himself.
He knows what to say and tell them what they want to hear.
So time and time again, he is able to slip through the cracks
Well,
based on the fact that he is just one charming motherfucker.
Yeah, I guess that could go. I actually didn't even think about that, how he interacts with law enforcement and juries and judges. And that could be one of the, he was able to, get these women, disarm these women and make them think he's okay enough to go off into, abandoned places before he actually started just snatching them off the street brutally. But yeah, that's very scary. I guess he could maybe talk me out of something.
Well, the women who encountered him and lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, he starts out charming.
They say he is a ladies' man.
He's a smooth talker.
Totally knows how to talk to you. He builds like a rapport, a trust. You see him as like just this really sweet, caring man.
He's not an ugly man.
You want to trust him.
He's a handsome guy in a way, kind of that cool, 70s, late 70s
Oh, yeah.
look.
No, he had some style in the 70s.
Yeah,
I was digging his look.
Yeah, so he's not a scary-looking guy. He's not insane-looking. So and I think those are the scariest types of serial killers.
Well, that's the thing we've seen with like the Ted Bundy situation. And I think we see that with Sam Little. They're not unattractive.
No.
You've got an attractive man. He's very charming and manipulative as fuck.
That's a bad combination.
Right. So it's easy to see how someone could fall victim to his good looks and charming personality.
Next thing you know, you're being brutally attacked. My God, how scary is that?
Well, he fails to attend that court-ordered rehab program, and a bench warrant is issued for his arrest. So Little is finally traced to a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky in 2012. He had cashed a Social Security check, and that alerted authorities to his whereabouts.
So think about that. His crime spree, his killing all these people and all these other countless crimes over so many decades to the point this man can get Social Security now, and he's getting fucking Social Security checks. That's crazy.
I mean, he's in his 70s
Yeah,
at this point.
I know.
So he's arrested and he's brought back to California. So during this time, there was an LAPD detective named Mitzi Roberts who finds a DNA match between Little and 3 cold cases in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah, there you go. Modern technology.
The murders of Carol Alford, Audrey Nelson, and Guadalupe Apodaca are traced to Sam Little. He's charged with the 3 counts of murder. So by September of 2014, Little is found guilty for the murders of those 3 women. He's later sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole.
Okay, so now they've got him. They're going to have him for the rest of his natural life.
At sentencing, a very disruptive Little is screaming in the courtroom, "I didn't do it!"
Well, he's used to winning in
I
these situations.
didn't do it.
Either he gets off completely or he gets a greatly reduced charge, some time he feels like he can do and, get back out.
And like we said, at this point, Sam Little is in his 70s. He's elderly. He's wheelchair bound.
Health issues.
Significant heart issues, health problems. He's just like a frail little old man.
That's crazy.
Analysts with the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, nicknamed VICAP, began working on linking cold cases. So they have this whole unit that's dedicated to analyzing data, statistics. They look at crime reports. Any police officer or police department or sheriff's office can submit reports like cold case stuff to VICAP.
Okay.
So they just comb through all this information and they work to match victims to patterns of
circumstance.
This could be a serial killer. These
Okay.
all fit the same, MO. This is in the same area. They're pinpointing locations.
Wow.
All of that. So this is some really cool shit. Well, all these patterns begin to emerge that link Little to more cases. And they're able to cross-reference, he was arrested in this area for shoplifting. He had a drug bust here. We can link him to Pascagoula at this time. He was in Florida at this time.
Oh, so now they're taking a hard look at this guy and they're thinking, hey, he's connected to multiple other murders. Possibly.
Yeah, they believe so. So they start matching all of this up. Well, during this time, there's a Texas Ranger. His name is James Holland. And he sets his sights on Samuel Little. He wants to interview him. So Holland and these FBI analysts believe that Little was involved in a cold case out of Odessa, Texas. Matches his MO. He was in Texas around this time. They think, we need to interview him. So Holland manages to get himself to California and wants to talk to Little. Now, he has to work to gain Little's trust because at this point, Little hates California. He hates the LAPD. And he refuses to talk to any officer associated with the LAPD.
So here comes this kind of suave, smart,
country, western, big old cowboy hat wearing,
Texas
slow
Ranger,
talking Texas Ranger who comes in friendly, southern. How you doing, buddy? Starts calling him Sammy, right off the bat. Little didn't mind. Little's like, oh, I hadn't been called Sammy since I was a boy.
Yeah, so
he starts calling the man Jimmy.
Talking kind of to him instead of at him. I give this guy so much credit because he knew he had a game plan and he knew how he was going to come in. He's from Texas, country boy. He has that southern drawl. And you take Sam Little's from Georgia.
Able to disarm him with that good old boy.
Yeah, these,
how you doing?
I'm sure he threw in a little bit of these big city people, their jokes or
Let's
whatever.
get you some good food to eat.
Yeah.
This stuff's slop. What can I do to make you more comfortable? Oh, you want a Coca-Cola? Let me go get you one.
Yeah.
I mean, just doing everything he can to build this trust with Little. And he does. They build a rapport. And Holland is able to conduct over 700 hours of interviews with Samuel Little.
So
Took
this
about
is,
18 months.
this is really what breaks the dam loose with Sam, I think. And he's there about this one case out of his jurisdiction. I'm sure that's his number one concern. But I think he may know it already with all these cross checks and talking to the FBI that the possibility here is to close multiple cold cases. I think little did they know how far it might actually go.
No. I think he definitely gets more than he bargained for, because that's when confessions begin pouring out of Little's mouth. Samuel Little confesses to 93 murders, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the story, FBI crime analysts believe all of his confessions are credible, and since interviewing him, they have been able to match at least 50, probably more at this point. And they're still working. They have a lot of pending confirmations out there.
Right.
But they are still working to bring justice to these victims' families. So during this investigation, law enforcement is able to determine that many of the victims' deaths were ruled overdoses, accidental, or they were just undetermined. And not all the bodies have been found yet. We're going to take a second to listen to some audio from Little's confessions now. I just want you guys to see his recall, his detail, memories he's had of these murders. So Ranger Holland also, while he has Little in this interrogation room, they're having these chats, he finds out that Little has artistic talent.
Yeah, he sees some of his drawings and stuff.
He manages to get to Little's cell and see that Little can draw.
Some of them, I mean, I'm not giving Sam Little any kind of credit, but when I see someone who can draw very good.
Well, he's a pretty talented artist.
The faces, it's like he's kind of stuck on faces, women's faces. Imagine that. Some of his drawings are amazing. So he figures out he has this pretty incredible artistic ability, and he's been talking to him. So he knows about his ability to recall. He might jumble up months and time periods, but as far as that moment, when the crime happened or what led up to it. And so he has a really great idea to use this to his advantage.
Oh, yeah. So Ranger Holland, he tells Sam Little, hey, man, I'm going to make a deal with you. If I supply you with art supplies, all the pencils and chalk and charcoal,
anything you want,
color pastels, tablets, anything that you want, will you draw me some photo or some portraits of your victims? Will you draw me some portraits?
My God.
And Sam Little says, absolutely. I mean, this is going to give him something to do. He's not sitting in his cell. He gets this whole workspace. He gets to draw and create. So he's like, sure, I'm on board.
Right. And that leads us to, I think, the part of this story everyone will remember when it broke. Oh my God, so many pictures all put together of his victims. Almost 100.
So Holland initially wanted information in regards to a murder in Texas, and that is the murder of Denise Christie Brothers. She was a 36-year-old from Odessa, Texas. In February of 1994, Little admitted that he killed this woman. So Holland manages to get that confession from Little. And he'd promised Little, if you tell me exactly what happened, you give me the information I want, the details I want, that we can prove you're responsible for this, we can bring closure to her family, I will have you extradited from California to Texas. You'll be tried for murder there, and we can get you out of California.
Yeah, and at this point, Sam hates California, basically.
Yeah.
He hates all the authorities around there. They're the ones who finally got him. So, I mean, I guess I understand. And so he's all for it. And maybe he gets different food, a different venue. And I guess, you're kind of, in a way, stroking his ego by talking to him. I mean, this guy's been in jail, in and out of jail all his life. He's an old man now. And he's kind of getting attention. It doesn't matter what kind of attention. So he's all for this.
This is so interesting to me. So at some point, there was a journalist who was able to sit down. She was from the New York Times, and I cannot remember her name. It's Jill something. I know I'm terrible. She sat down with him, and she was probably one of the only journalists that's been able to sit down and have a conversation with Little. And she had asked him, what the deal was, why do you do the things that you do, basically. And he said he felt an overpowering need to control women.
Okay.
He explained that he relished in their helplessness, and he said, and I quote, "All I ever wanted was for them to cry in my arms."
Okay.
Well, the journalist says, "Well, they did, and then you killed them." And he retorted with, "Well, I guess that's not all I wanted."
Wow. Damn, that's creepy on so many levels.
Since Little's confessions and the accompanying artwork, they've been able to match the victims. And though there are still some remaining victims out there unmatched, the FBI, law enforcement agencies are still combing through the artwork, trying to match it to potential missing persons through NamUs, the Charlie Project, reading through old newspaper articles, trying to basically be able to make connections. And again, Samuel Little is considered the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history.
Well, I think just sheer number of victims, for one, he's definitely that. And then the fact it was all over the country. It wasn't in one place. I mean, we saw a map where he would literally, jot numbers, 11 here, 3 here, 2 here, 15 here.
And though his recall
states.
is just mind-blowing, the details, the faces, the just little things he remembers what they were wearing.
He remembers what was
street names. I picked this woman up on 17th Avenue in Miami, and she was wearing a red and cream colored skirt.
Yeah, and he would remember items laying around the abandoned crime scene, abandoned areas where he would throw these victims out. He would remember a pipe was laying a certain way.
Or I put her over by, there was a fence, and it was starting to fall down a little bit.
Right. And so
they would go back and look at crime scene photos and be like, well, damn, he was right. There was a fence about a foot back.
Yeah, and it
had caved in. So it was flat on the ground, and we didn't see it.
Yep.
But now we've gone back and looked, and sure enough, there was a fence there.
Yeah, and that's Investigator 101. You keep some details from the crime scene or how the murder transpired too close to the vest, and you're waiting in case someone confesses or you finally nail someone down on the details. And if they give you those details back, you know that only the killer knew that. It wasn't in the media, wasn't in the newspapers. And that's what quickly turned them on to the fact that Sam Little is telling the truth on all these cases.
Well, as far as the women who haven't been identified yet, I think there's a couple of things that could be working against them. Is that, one, he's great at recalling certain details when it comes to the victims, but he's not great with time frames.
Or dates.
He gets the dates and the times mixed up a little bit.
Right.
Which, I mean, the guy's in his 70s. That's not surprising. And perhaps he just can't. He's responsible for so many murders that he can't exactly remember if it was 71 or 74.
Oh, my God.
So that, I think, has kind of been a bit of a roadblock for them. And then also, the women he was preying upon, I mean, they were on the fringes of society. So many of them might have been missing, runaways, and they have family out there, but no one even reported them missing.
Well, I mean, you said earlier that some of their deaths were classified as accidental, overdoses, undetermined. So it's hard to go back into the archives. And I mean, cross-checking helps to a certain degree, but it makes some of this almost impossible to find in the system.
One of the victims, and I'm recalling this from my memory of the research, was he described this woman as a transsexual. That this trans woman, he picked her up in Miami. He described what she was wearing, said she was about maybe 17 to 19 years old. He described putting her in the car, driving her what he called down Alligator Alley, heading toward Fort Lauderdale, and murdered her and dumped her body in a wetlands kind of area,
right,
like a swampy area. And that's a person that's never been identified. But it's the fact that he dumped her in a swampy area. Well, some of these people, their bodies just may have never been recovered.
Well, yeah, I mean, that very well could have been eaten by animals, alligators and such. I mean, honestly, that would happen.
And if you're thinking of a trans person in the 70s, they're probably most likely estranged from their family. They were kind of living this lifestyle that maybe people didn't absolutely approve of at that time. So this was a person that, yeah, you might not be able to track them down. They're not going by their birth name. They've changed their name.
Right.
I mean, so I can see where they have difficulty in identifying all of these victims.
And one other thing I'd like to add before we do get to the end is that what stood out for me is that same ranger asked Little if when he had close calls with law enforcement, like the one time you described when they caught him red-handed choking this woman, and he ended up getting off. I don't know how. But he said in Ocala, I think that's in Florida, another time,
Yes.
same exact circumstances. He had literally just killed this woman, just got done killing her. Cops pull up on his car. He's getting out, so he quickly, like, what am I going to say? So he comes up with a story, and he gets out, and he's pulling his pants up, fixing his pants, all in the light of the headlights. Cop comes over and is like, what's going on? And in the back of the car, which he seemed to favor these bigger cars like station wagons and such.
He had a Cadillac Eldorado at one point. He liked the Lincolns, like the big full-size vehicles.
Because he knew what he was going to do in these cars. So the cop comes over, is like, what's going on? He's like, well, me and my wife are out here just fooling around. And the cop looks in the car, and all he sees is a naked female with her legs spread open. But she's, unknown to him, she's dead. He just killed her and raped her before, I'm sure. And the cop is just like embarrassed, like, oh God.
And little laughs and says the blush across this officer's face.
A young officer.
That he's just like, oh Lord, not expecting to see this naked woman.
Right.
Like he was so embarrassed that he just quickly gathers himself and gets out of there.
He tells him, y'all, you should keep that inside or, keep that in the bedroom, and he takes off. So, I mean, that was the close call in Little's mind that stuck out because this was very early on in him killing people. And he's like, I just killed this woman. There's a dead body in my car. And the cop just, I can't blame the cop. I mean, I've never been in those circumstances. But it was just yet another missed opportunity to get this maniac off the street. That would have been the end of him.
Well, of the total 76 arrests on Samuel Little's record, arrested 76 times over the last, 50 years, basically? Yeah. He's spent a total of about 10 years in prison and jail.
That's crazy.
Out of that time, on and off.
That's crazy.
For 76 crimes.
So, overall, it was no one's intention, I'm sure, but it's just, I think you could say the system failed when it had time after time had a chance to get this man off the street, and countless people could have been saved. But here on the other end of it, of course, hindsight's 2020, I think this is the most prolific cold case closure in history to date. So many victims taken off the boards, resolution to so countless families. And I think it's the dedication of all the profilers and the people who put these technologies together. So we're hard on investigators a lot on Mountain murders, and everybody's like, oh, the cops should have done this and that. But I think this is one time we can say here on the other end of it
that these people were not giving up.
They were not giving up.
They were going to solve some of these cold cases.
And for every submission into a system you were describing that they have is some cop who won't let a case go or has picked a cold case back up. They never could forget about it or whatever. And they've made submissions to this because they want answers and they want resolution for these families. So my hat goes off to all those investigators. And I think it's an incredible job they did here in the end of Sam Little's story.
Well, I think his story is very interesting. I wanted to share it, obviously, with our Mountain Murders listeners because it is such a big story. And I feel like considering the size of his victim list.
My God.
You would think that his name would be more of a household name. But there's really not a whole lot of information out there about Sam Little.
No, I mean, when the drawings and all that came out about the investigators put together, it blipped up in the true crime news for a second, and it was just gone.
Even looking for other podcasts, is this a big story? I mean, there are a few out there, but not the amount you would expect.
This guy deserves...
There's only one book that I found.
This guy sadly deserves...
that had a brief chapter on Sam Little. There's several TV documentaries. But other than that, I mean, there's not a lot of information.
So we feel like we brought you a combination of a heavy hitter who maybe hasn't found his place in the top 10 yet, but he deserves to be there sadistically, or sadly. It's a hard thing to say. And he was also a killer who operated around the Appalachians.
Well, in this region,
many instances,
Ohio, Pennsylvania,
yeah. So here
Georgia.
There you go. It was episode 100. Sam Little, scary dude.
He claims he's murdered women in Knoxville, Chattanooga.
I believe him. I believe he may have forgotten victims off that list. I believe it's 100 plus. I believe it's over 100.
It could be very well
because it sounds like his cooling off period once he got going was not very long, 3 to 6 weeks. When his urges came, he went Nothing stopped him. He might, early on he would meet him in bars, talk him out into trusting him. And then it seems like he got to where he would just snatch a woman straight off the street violently. That's very scary. So, my God.
Well, what I think so interesting about Sam Little as well, Dylan, and you mentioned this a bit, is while he was operating in L.A., there was also the Grim Sleeper.
Yeah.
Another black man who was a serial killer. And just in my research, I feel like in the true crime community, there's been like this stereotype or like a misconception that all serial killers are white men.
Right.
And we're learning more and more that no, there have been active black serial killers out there preying on black women. But the problem is, and we know that this is true, that black women don't receive the attention from law enforcement. They don't receive the attention from the media.
It's
that
true.
A white victim receives.
It's true.
And we see that all the time.
And so you could say...
So part of it, I think, is that we don't realize there are black serial killers operating and murdering women in the black community because... sadly, people don't care. And I say people, I mean like law enforcement, the media. They don't care. So they're not reporting on it. So we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
But we're seeing that, no, they're out there and they're preying on this marginalized group of people.
Just nobody's took the time to look at the patterns and things existing in these communities around them to say, hey, we got a problem. The Grim Sleeper carried on for many years.
Same thing.
Sam
killing
Little.
Prostitutes, killing drug addicts, women that he knew nobody would care about, or nobody would report missing, or that cops would dismiss. And it's the same thing with Samuel Little.
Wayne Williams.
And they're preying on marginalized victims who are poor. They're women of color, mostly. They are addicts, alcoholics, estranged from their families. They're sex workers.
What can you say?
I mean,
it's obvious what, that happens. And I think all we can do now is we can try to do better as a society. You take these communities of color, but not only that, poor communities. Wayne Williams was killing children. He was killing children in Atlanta. And how we all know, if you've seen or watched Mindhunters or any of that, how long it took to get the damn cops on board with, hey, someone's preying on these children. So that wasn't prostitutes. That wasn't drug addicts. Yet again.
They're innocent kids.
Innocent kids.
From good families.
Yeah.
They're living in Atlanta and they went to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And they go missing and their families can't get any help.
Yeah, you had a literal group of moms, together organizing on their own in that case. So it's very sad. And all I can say about it is we can do better.
We can do better.
We will do better.
Well, and I have to say, Black lives matter. And all lives can't matter unless Black lives matter.
Yes.
So there's my statement.
Poor lives matter too.
Yeah. Well, I
we
think
gotta
we
stop.
see it's the there's so many components to this. It's a socioeconomic thing.
Yes.
It's a racist issue.
Well,
there's a lot of things at play here.
It's true. Just like, they can talk about the blonde hair, blue eyed kid, girl that goes missing in the island or whatever, Elizabeth Smart, but those families are rich.
Or Natalie Holloway.
Those families have money. They have influence in the local community. That same little girl, pretty blue-eyed little girl from a trailer park goes missing. She's going to get a lot less attention as well. It doesn't matter if she's white, so my God, people, if you can't see it, and I know that our listeners out there are super smart, they can see it. So we'll work together to do better. Well,
I'm going to include some of Sam Little's drawings on social media. So if you want to follow Mountain Murders Podcast on Instagram, I will post several photos, some of the drawings, or as my daughter would say, the drawings.
The draweries.
The drawings. She adds the L to it. It's pretty cute. She's 14, but she says drawings.
That's okay.
Anyway, I'll post some of Sam Little's drawings on Instagram.
Yep.
So you can peruse through and just see like his eye for detail.
Yeah, and she's going to put a clip of in one of his interviews, but there's a lot of audio out there. And I would say if you're interested in this at all, you should listen to some of that because listening to him speak in his own words is pretty scary.
Thanks for tuning in. You can support the podcast by joining us on patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. Sign up for as little as $3 a month to access bonus material. We talk about a lot of different things, true crime, but other stuff on our Patreon. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. As always, we love you guys, and we wouldn't be here without you and your support. So thank you for allowing us to bring you 100 episodes of Mountain Murders.
Yes, and I got so excited it was our 100th, I forgot to mention our newest patron. This episode is sponsored by Kayla.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you, Kayla, and all the other patrons.
Suwan.
Oh, and Suwan. Thank you, Suwan.
Suwan is our other patron, brand new, and we appreciate her. She's been a longtime fan. She sent us quite a few emails. Oh, and real quick here, guys.
She gave me my hobo name.
I am looking for listener stories. We want to put together a listener story episode. We put one of these out last year. We got a lot of creepy, scary stories. So we're hoping that you'll send us maybe paranormal experiences you've had. Perhaps you've had some strange encounter with someone who turned out to be a serial killer. Maybe you went on a date with a murderer. I've actually seen some people on our Facebook page talk about, I went on a Tinder date with some guy who's a serial killer.
Oh, my God.
Like crazy stuff.
Well,
So
yeah.
we want to hear UFO stories, cryptid stories. We're going to put together a listener episode. You can submit by emailing mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. You can send me a DM on Instagram, a Facebook message with your story, and you can be featured on a future episode.
Yeah, we love those. We can't wait to hear them.
Thanks, guys. Our favorite pastime is watching true crime TV and horror movies. And when we're snuggled up on the couch, I've been enjoying our brand new Everlasting Comfort luxury faux fur throw blanket. It's a soft, silky, and lightweight throw, perfect for the couch. It feels like real fur. It's plush, smooth, and oh so comfy.
She doesn't even want to snuggle me anymore.
We ordered the teal-colored throw. It's gorgeous. And the best part is there's a lifetime replacement guarantee. If anything happens, they'll send you a new blanket at no cost. You can relax worry-free knowing you can rely on the help of Everlasting Comfort.
Check out Everlasting Comfort for the softest blanket ever.